you got Isom 1 out. So obviously, I'm guessing you had a plan for. You probably had the story of Isom 1, 2, 3 kind of at least in your head. When did you kind of go from like, okay, now I got these other characters. Now I want to maybe bring in some other writers. Mm-hmm. Like you start kind of like, okay, we could actually blow this up, you know?
Right. So initially, while I did have those aspirations to bring other people on, it was hard to conceptualize how quickly I was going to do that or even be able to afford to do that, like before we launched it. Mm-hmm. So I wrote Isom 1, and I had my universe Bible with all these entries for these various characters. And I introduced in that book in Isom 1, Yaira and Alpha Core. And so while I'm thinking that maybe I was going to be the writer for those, it was like, no, the audience demanded that, like, definitely when they saw Yaira, they demanded that stuff happen. But I'm also like doing all the Isom stuff at the same time. So, and I'm trying to run a business. So it happened pretty quickly where I'm like, I got to reach out to some guys. I got to reach out to some people. And it was a shot in the dark with a lot of it. Like, you know, the Saskas doing Yaira, for example. I was a fan, and it's funny watching all that paper trail there because, you know, when I was just a general consumer of comic books, I was reviewing their work with, and I was a huge fan. I became a fan of them organically. And then I reach out to them, shot in the dark, right? I'm like, cause I interviewed them for my show. Again, that was a shot in the dark thinking that they were going to come on like that. And then, so I had that connection and I just said, I ain't got nothing to lose, right? Mm-hmm. What do you guys think? Would you do? I mean, they said yes, almost immediately.
That's awesome.
And, you know, then eventually, you know, Chuck Dixon, same thing. I mean, that's a legend. I'm like, well, again, might as well shoot high. If he mm-hmm. says no, that's the worst thing that he can say. He says, I'm in. Yeah. And so, and I got them characters, obviously, to write that I knew they can handle, you know, Chuck and all the stuff that he has done, as well as what the Saskas have been able to do. And I'm glad that they took it up and they got to work immediately and we got to work. But I mean, in all honesty, I was thinking I was going to be the one that was going to write those characters. It was going to be further down the line. And like I said, mm-hmm. that all changed day one. It didn't take long where that changed immediately. And it was like, number one, you're not going to have the time to do it because you have a business to run. And then you're doing all this other stuff. So you can't take as much time. I can't sit there and be like, oh, I put out one book every year or two. Like, I can't do that. Those days, were going to be very short-lived. If I thought that was what I was going to do, I did want to get to work pretty quickly. Me and Cliff were already kicking around Isom 2, but yeah, with the other works and having those be able to be produced, because, you know, definitely with a book, like, for example, Isom 2 is 112 pages. Well, that's going to take a while to do. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. So, even if it was just going to be me, you know, you're talking about drawing that out, but thankfully we were able to get them involved. And, you know, we've added obviously a team. We've got like Mike, Barron that did Good and the Polymath. You have, Carol Brown, who's on my team, and she's done the latest Rippaverse story. So there's been an opportunity to add people to the team that can just do what they do best, and that's come up with great stories. Yeah,
for sure. I just think that it's just so cool that you were so quickly able to be like, I'm going to let other people create in my world too. Because I think that's a lot of, you know, people get really, you know, you write a thing and you're like, this is like my baby. Right. And then you're just going to give it to a bunch of people. And I think it was cool that you were able to just be like, hey, come on in, like come to the playground, play around.
And that also speaks to them as professionals, mm-hmm. Because they knew that, you know, these are characters that definitely the first characters that they did were all characters that I created. Now we have branched out with that. You have characters like, the Horseman, which was fully conceptualized by Joe Bennett and Chuck Dixon. But initially they, you know, like Yaira, Alpha Core, these are characters that I created. Mm-hmm. And I had a lot of fun creating them. And I knew that I had to bring some people, not only that knew what they were doing, but also respected it enough to make it about that vision that I still had for them. And that's a testament to them as creators. Because a lot of people, and we've seen this especially in the mainstream, where they'll take something and then they make it about them.
Oh, yeah.
And it's basically a version of them. It's not the character speaking. It's not trying to put that character that has that already established, like, sort of background and putting them in scenarios that are new and fresh. A lot of people don't do that, right? Well, but they were respectful enough. They were professional enough they wanted to ask those questions. When I had that first meeting, they both had these, notepads, and they're like just taking notes. Okay, tell me about character X, Y, and Z. And they're like, oh, they're writing it down and stuff because they took it serious. So while I say this all the time, like, for example, Alpha Core, which was the first non ISOM book that we released, that's very much a story that I couldn't come up with, but it's very much Brian Braxwell and Ingrid Valdez in those stories. So that speaks to them. A big shout out to Chuck and everybody else that were able to develop these concepts. And I love that we gave them this fun sandbox because they were also able to create new characters that were fully conceptualized by them. So again, big shout out to them.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's cool that you just kind of reached out to him, because one of the kind of things I always have kind of lived by is the worst thing that happens is someone says no. So you might as well ask and see what happens.
If they say shoot for the stars, that's exactly what I did. I was like, they might say no. They're probably gonna say no, but they didn't, thankfully. And it happens. It just, so that's I was shooting for the moon there, and thankfully they wanted to be a part of it. And I'm blessed to have them here, because also I've learned a lot from them. Relatively speaking, especially when it comes to their careers, and also age wise, like, I'm younger than them. And they're more accomplished in that sphere. Like, both of them, the Saskas, as well as, Chuck, they had been doing creative stuff, for a while. Like, obviously Saskas not only did comic book stuff, that was in the mainstream, but they also obviously are filmmakers, right? So they had been there, done that, and everybody knows Chuck Dixon's been there and done everything, right? So I've learned a lot. I say that because I've learned so much from them with the Rippaverse stuff and that we're doing, like, just creatively even. And again, I'm blessed to be around them, blessed to be able to, especially like a Chuck Dixon, where I'm like, it's almost like a mentor. Right? You learn a lot about how he does things. So I love that so much.